Imagine waking up in the morning to find that your life savings, enough yesterday to buy a house, can now barely afford a loaf of bread. That your monthly salary is worthless by the time you receive it. That people are carrying cash in wheelbarrows, not wallets. That's not a dystopian fantasy. That's hyperinflation, and it's happened more times than most people realize. We think of money as something stable, something we can count on, but history says otherwise. And the worst hyperinflations didn't just destroy bank accounts. They destroyed governments, families, empires. They burned through societies like financial wildfires, exposing just how fragile our systems really are. You're about to see exactly how 5 countries, 5 real economies, watch their currencies collapse in ash and what it cost them. And as you listen, remember, inflation isn't always loud at first. It creeps in, it whispers, and by the time most people notice, it's too late to run. Let's start in Germany, 1923, the Weimar Republic. After World War I, Germany was crushed by debt. The Treaty of Versailles had slapped the country with over 132 billion gold marks in reparations, an amount so staggering it would have taken generations to repay. So what did the German government do? It printed money. Lots of it. At first, it seemed manageable. Then prices doubled, then tripled, then exploded. By November 1923, the German mark was virtually worthless. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People burned cash for warmth. Children played with bricks of currency. Middle-class families watched lifetimes of savings evaporate in weeks. And here's the deeper damage. It wasn't just money that collapsed. It was trust. Once a society loses faith in its currency, everything breaks. Commerce, contracts, savings, salaries, all of it disintegrates. This financial collapse helped pave the way for social collapse. It created the desperation and chaos that gave extremists their opening. Just a decade later, Adolf Hitler seized power, and economic trauma was part of the foundation. Fast forward to Zimbabwe, early 2000s. President Robert Mugabe's government, facing sanctions and economic isolation, launched massive land seizures that wrecked agricultural productivity. The government responded with, you guessed it, the printing press. And once again, the spiral began. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was estimated at 79.6 billion%. Prices doubled every 24 hours. The government kept adding zeros to the currency. 10 million, 100 billion, $100 trillion bills. Eventually, they just gave up, switching to foreign currencies like the US dollar and South African rand. And what did it cost? Not just numbers on paper. Hyperinflation wiped out pensions, collapsed industries, and created a generation of economic refugees. Real wealth, land, skills, hard assets was the only thing that survived. Let's go back in time again. Hungary, 1946. This one is often called the worst hyperinflation in recorded history. After World War II, Hungary was economically shattered. The government started issuing a currency called the pengo and printing it at an insane rate to cover war debts and reconstruction. At its peak, prices were doubling every 15 hours. The inflation rate hit 41.9 quadrillion%. That's a 4 followed by 16 zeros. The currency was so devalued that the government created a new note, the mil pengo, worth 1 million pengo. Then a B pengo, worth 1 billion pengo. And still, it wasn't enough. Eventually, the government abandoned the currency entirely and started over with the forint. What did they lose? Everything. Hungary's middle class was annihilated. Savings accounts went to zero, and the government lost any remaining legitimacy. Hyperinflation didn't just reset the economy, it erased the past. Next, let's turn to Latin America, Venezuela, 2010s to present. Oil-rich, resource-rich, yet politically broken. Years of corruption, price controls, nationalizations, and reckless monetary policy turned one of the region's wealthiest countries into a cautionary tale. The government printed money to cover deficits, subsidize failing programs, and maintain control. And again, inflation took off. By 2018, Venezuela's inflation rate crossed 1 million%. Imagine earning your paycheck and having to spend it that day before it loses half its value. Supermarkets were empty. Barter returned. Doctors and engineers fled the country to work as delivery drivers abroad. And just like in Zimbabwe, the government began issuing new bills with more zeros until they finally gave up and slashed 6 zeros off the currency overnight. But you can't slash away the damage. Hyperinflation gutted Venezuela's economy, shredded its healthcare system, and turned millions of citizens into migrants. Once again, those with physical assets or access to dollars survived. Those without didn't. And now we arrive at a more obscure case, Yugoslavia, 1990s. After the breakup of the Soviet bloc and the violent disintegration of the country, Yugoslavia's economy collapsed under the weight of war, sanctions, and mismanagement. In 1993, inflation reached 313 million% per month. Prices doubled every 1.4 days. To try to stabilize things, the government introduced new currencies again and again, each time wiping out old savings. Citizens used German marks and US dollars on the side just to survive. The official currency became a joke, useful only for lighting cigarettes or wallpapering abandoned shops. And underneath it all, the pattern repeats. A government faces crisis. It prints money. Trust evaporates. Currency collapses. Society fractures. Over and over again, different countries, different decades, same mistake. You might be thinking, well, that's history. We're smarter now. We've learned. But have we? Today, global debt levels are at record highs. The United States alone holds over $34 trillion in national debt, and growing. Central banks around the world have spent the last decade printing trillions of dollars to prop up economies, suppress interest rates, and stimulate markets. And for a while, it seemed to work. Inflation was tame. Growth continued. The system held. Until it didn't. In 2021 and 2022, something changed. After years of low inflation, prices began rising fast. Supply chain shocks, war in Ukraine, energy spikes, and yes, trillions in freshly printed money finally caught up. Suddenly, central banks went from printing to panicking. Interest rates were hiked aggressively. Markets wobbled. And everyday people, the ones who didn't benefit from the cheap money boom, began to feel the squeeze. Rents surged. Food prices climbed. Wages didn't keep up. And for the first time in decades, people started asking hard questions again. What is money? Who controls it? What happens when the trust breaks? We're not in hyperinflation territory yet, but the warning signs are there. Not just in prices, but in mindset. In the idea that printing money can solve structural problems. That we can borrow forever without consequences. That central banks will always bail us out. These are dangerous assumptions. The same ones made in Weimar Germany, in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela. The difference now is scale. Because never before has the entire global economy been so interconnected, so debt-driven, and so dependent on central bank intervention. If trust breaks now, it won't just be one country. It could be systemic. And that brings us to you. You might not control the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, but you do control your exposure, your savings, your habits, your mindset. So what can you learn from the 5 worst hyperinflations in history? First, real wealth is not paper. It's purchasing power. It's land, skills, hard assets, useful networks, and internal resilience. Every single one of these nations saw printed wealth vanish, but those who had tangible assets or could produce value outside the financial system endured. Second, trust is everything. Currencies don't collapse because the ink fades. They collapse because belief does. Once people stop believing that the money in their hand has value, the game ends. That belief can erode faster than most people imagine. And once it's gone, it's almost impossible to rebuild. Third, inflation punishes the unprepared. It moves fast, it compounds, and it hits those living paycheck to paycheck the hardest. Governments may inflate their debt away, but you can't inflate your grocery bill down. That's why financial education isn't just about growing your wealth, it's about protecting it. So what does protection look like today? It looks like understanding the system instead of blindly trusting it. It looks like reducing unnecessary exposure to debt. It looks like diversifying your assets, not just across stocks, but across systems. Maybe that means some hard currency. Maybe it means learning a skill that holds value no matter what happens to the markets. Maybe it means building a life that costs less to sustain. Most of all, it means remembering that inflation is a hidden tax, a form of theft, a slow erosion of your financial freedom, unless you know how to guard against it. The 5 worst hyperinflations in history weren't random events. They were caused by bad policy, by war, by denial, by arrogance, and by the seductive lie that money can be created without consequence. But now you know better. You've seen the pattern. And the next time someone says, that could never happen here, you'll know exactly how to respond. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same.